All right, so we're going to jump right into a pretty heavy topic today, one that really shook the hip-hop world back in 2022.
Yeah, the death of rapper Trouble. Definitely a case that grabbed a lot of attention, and now there's finally been a resolution in the courts.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be digging into today, the sentencing of Jamichael Jones, the man found responsible for Trouble's death. Big takeaway right off the bat, Jones has been sentenced to 20 years in prison.
It's a major development, a kind of closure, I guess, even though the impact of losing Trouble is still being felt deeply, especially in the hip-hop community.
Absolutely. And I think what's especially interesting here is the way this sentencing came about. This case was actually right on the edge of going to a full-blown trial, but then boom, a plea deal happened.
Yeah, plea deals, they're often strategic moves in these legal situations. They can help everyone involved kind of sidestep the uncertainty and the emotional toll of a trial.
Makes sense. So as part of this plea deal, Jones admitted guilt to voluntary manslaughter. Now, gotta remember, he was initially staring down much more serious charges, like murder, among others. So when you see a shift to a lesser charge, like voluntary manslaughter, what does that usually tell us?
Well, generally, it means the killing happened under specific circumstances, often involving a sudden provocation, something that triggers a really intense reaction. Legally, they call it the heat of passion. Basically, it suggests that there wasn't that element of premeditation that you'd see with a murder charge.
Okay, so it's more about a spontaneous act rather than something planned out.
Right. So the fact that this plea was accepted probably indicates that both sides, the prosecution and the defense, felt like this charge was a better fit for what actually went down, or maybe it was just a calculated compromise to avoid the risks of a trial.
Interesting. So let's get into the timeline here. Jones has already been locked up for a while now, ever since shortly after Trouble's death. So this 20-year sentence is going to include that time he's already served, right?
Definitely. Yeah, that's the standard procedure. When they hand down a sentence, they always take into account any time the person's already spent behind bars for that specific case.
Makes sense. So now that we've got the legal outcome squared away, let's take a look at how we got here. What exactly led up to this tragedy?
Well, it all went down at an apartment around 3 in the morning. The woman who lived there had a history with Jamichael Jones, and she was with Trouble at the time. So that past relationship is a key piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and this is where the details get really complicated and honestly heartbreaking. Jones was actually this woman's ex-boyfriend. They lived together even. They had a relationship that lasted about 3 years, but she had recently broken things off. Apparently, the reason was that Jones was unemployed and not really pulling his weight financially in the household.
Right, so you've got that context of a recent separation, plus the added stress of financial strain. It's like a recipe for a really volatile situation, emotionally speaking. Probably played a huge role in how things escalated.
And tragically, it sounds like this wasn't the first time things turned violent. We've learned that even before the night of Trouble's death, Jones allegedly assaulted this woman, punched her in the face after they broke up, then took off. She did call the police, but for whatever reason, she didn't end up filing a formal report. It's a detail that, knowing what happened later, is really disturbing.
Absolutely. It just shows how fast these domestic disputes can spiral out of control. And it makes you think about the missed opportunities for intervention, the potential consequences when things aren't addressed early on. It's a reminder of the tough choices people face when deciding whether or not to take legal action in personal conflicts.
Yeah, no easy answers there. So then, on the night of Trouble's death, Jones reportedly got into the woman's apartment. Apparently, he woke her up by assaulting her again, another punch to the face. And then, that's when the confrontation between Jones and Trouble went down.
Right, so that altercation seems to be the turning point in the whole thing. The fact that Jones copped to voluntary manslaughter, it suggests that the lawyers were really focused on the nature of that fight. Was there a sense of danger? Was Jones acting impulsively in the heat of the moment? Those are the kinds of questions that would have been front and center during the plea deal negotiations.
And so, tragically, it was during this fight that Jones allegedly pulled out a gun and shot Trouble once, right in the chest. Then, after the shooting, Jones fled the scene.
Yeah, and sadly, when the police arrived at the apartment, they found Trouble, rushed him to the hospital, but his injuries were just too severe.
A truly devastating sequence of events. You could just see how anger and that inability to de-escalate a tense situation led to this awful outcome. And of course, having a gun in the mix just instantly raises the stakes to a whole other level.
No doubt about it. It adds a whole other layer of danger to any conflict.
It's worth noting that Jones didn't manage to stay hidden for long, though. He actually turned himself into the police just a few days after the shooting.
Yeah, that surrender can definitely play a role in how things proceed legally. It might be seen as a sign of remorse, like he's taking responsibility, even though it doesn't erase the gravity of the crime itself.
True. Now, beyond the legal side of things, Trouble's death had a massive impact on the hip-hop community. He was a well-respected artist, and so many people felt his loss deeply. One person who was especially close to Trouble was rapper Boosie Badass.
Yeah, their bond was clearly very strong. Boosie's public reaction really speaks volumes about the personal tragedy behind this case, the ripple effect it had on those who knew Trouble well.
I heard in an interview, Boosie said he just cried for hours straight when he found out Trouble was gone. He talks about Trouble being a close friend, someone he hung out with regularly, talked to all the time. He even called Trouble a light-skinned Boothie, which says a lot about how connected they were, their shared experiences.
That kind of closeness makes the grief so much deeper, so much more intense. It reminds us that we're not talking about abstract figures here. We're talking about real people with deep connections and friendships that are shattered by violence like this.
And what really got to me was what Boosie said about Trouble's daughter. They were actually raising their daughters to be friends. And he said when he was on a plane with his own daughter, he couldn't stop thinking about Trouble and the unimaginable pain his daughter must be going through. He even connected it to his own mortality, imagining his own child having to deal with that kind of loss. It's a powerful and heartbreaking reminder of the human cost of this tragedy, how it extends far beyond Trouble himself.
Absolutely. Boosie's words give us this raw, unfiltered glimpse into the grief and sense of loss that ripples through a community when something like this happens. It's not just about losing a talented artist, it's about losing a friend, a father, a vital part of their world. And his reflections on their children really highlight the long-lasting impact on families.
It's heavy stuff for sure. So, just to recap, Jamichael Jones has been sentenced to 20 years for the voluntary manslaughter of Trouble. This decision came through a plea agreement, avoiding a trial. The tragic events unfolded after Jones, who was the ex-boyfriend of Trouble's girlfriend, forced his way into her apartment. Their relationship had ended because of Jones's unemployment and financial problems, and there was a history of violence there. And during that final confrontation, Trouble was fatally shot. The outpouring of grief from the hip-hop community, especially from someone like Boosie Badass, underscores the profound personal loss everyone feels.
It's a case that really lays bare the complex and often tragic intersection of personal relationships, unresolved conflicts, and violence. It leaves us grappling with the devastating consequences of these situations, how they affect not only the people directly involved, but also their wider circles, the communities. It raises tough questions about how personal disputes can escalate to such a horrific point and the lasting damage they inflict.
Really makes you think about how fragile things can be, how quickly a situation can spiral out of control, and the enduring impact these events have on everyone involved. Thanks for joining us for this difficult but important deep dive.
Absolutely.
Until next time.
See you then.